Welcome back, everybody. It's Monday night. You are seeing us, which is nice. We took a week off, but we're here. It's IDP. We're getting into roster construction, although it is not Sully's Cooking Extravaganza. It is IDP roster construction. This is the IDP HeatSeekers Show. We are excited to be back. We are excited to talk to you about how to build your rosters, and it's going to be a fun one tonight. We are live on YouTube and Facebook every Monday night that we show up, which is most Monday nights. We are here to talk to you. We're here to help you. If you guys have questions, post them in the comments, post them in the chats. We will answer them live on the stream. And let's get at it. It's Monday night, so I'm joined by my usual suspects, Kraig Paul and Paul Alden. Kraig, how are you tonight, sir?
The end of Monday. Wasn't a bad Monday. It wasn't a good Monday. It was productive. Got stuff done, got the kids to bed. I can't complain overall. How was your Monday, Paul?
Yeah, work was fun. Won a little bit of money on Friday, spent it on Saturday. Almost had somebody sell me the card where it's Brad's cousins on the side. And then I looked in the box in front of me, and they had Aaron Hernandez in there. So we're getting it out of the way early tonight, but it was a fun weekend. Well, watched a little bit of racing on Sunday, and yeah, good weekend. But Monday's Monday. At least we get to finish it on a bang here.
We are going to be banging out some great IDP conversations tonight. All right, so before we get into roster construction, there are some potentially IDP relevant news and notes. I say that very loosely, but Mr. Reith, tell us what's going on in the world of football.
Yeah, so it's sort of the more name-ish type of things that happened here since we were last on. Jadeveon Clowney signed a one-year deal with the Browns to play opposite of Myles Garrett and hopefully have a good season to rehab his value and maybe get another big contract. He's turning 29 this year, so he'll be going to do his age 30 season next year. They did pay him a good chunk of money. I mean, it tops out at, I think, $8 million about. So not nothing. And sort of related to that, they also cut Sheldon Richardson, who certainly had value in defensive tackle specific leagues, but also in some of your just regular defensive line leagues. He had some help. Other defensive line notes, Maurice Hurst and Arden Key were both cut from the Raiders. Another sort of interesting one, on the 15th, the Seahawks announced Alden Smith had signed. I think it was a one-year deal with them, and then it turns out 2 days later there was some sort of issue in New Orleans, and from what we know, he's wanted for second-degree battery. So we don't know the specifics, but given his history, I think that very well may void his contract with the Seahawks if they so choose to. So we'll see if he actually ends up playing or what happens from there. And then Vince Williams is back in Pittsburgh, who did need linebacker help. Remains to be seen if he's going to start or not, but is familiar with the system, and he's back there on a one-year deal. So kind of do dealer's choice here, Paul. Any thoughts on any of those specifically?
I know we talked about it before the show, but I don't get why Cleveland decided to let Richardson out for Clowney. Just, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I know they got Ogunjobi and the Baylor kid, but Richardson's not a difference maker,
Solid
but
starter.
he's pretty solid, and Clowney is more of a hopeful, but I mean, it is what it is. I'm not the one who runs the show there. Hurst and Key just haven't lived up to the February before they were drafted hype. I mean, that just kind of is what it is. I know Hurst he looks fine, but he never sees the field, which is really odd. And the last one there, Vince Williams, Bush should be on the field more. It's interesting how when they were recruits, how Vince was the one who was the afterthought, and Carlos was the one who everyone wanted, and look who stuck around in the pros. But that was interesting. But but that's more of an actual football perspective than fantasy perspective, because Vince Williams is just LB4-ish, what you're looking at. Someone that you don't want to flex.
Well, and I think, from a personal standpoint, if the Lions stumble across this video in the next few hours, pick them up. I don't even care which one. Sheldon Richardson, Hurst, Key, anybody, and I kind of would expand that to any defense that could use some defensive line help, which is, there's quite a few of those. You should probably try to pick these guys up. They're all young enough. I mean, even Sheldon Richardson, what is he, 28, 29? He's still got a few solid years of production left. From a fantasy perspective, I think Alden Key would be an interesting stash if he landed somewhere where he could be a more traditional hand-in-the-dirt type guy that actually gets some development. I think the biggest issue I've had for both of those guys is the Raiders are just not good at developing talent. Like, I've not seen them really take a young guy and build him up. John Gruden's all about that quarterback and that offensive love, but we still haven't seen him do anything there. So I'm excited for both these guys to get out of Vegas, and they're young enough that I think both of them could maybe land in a spot where you see some sort of return on value. So if I'm in a league where I'm starting all these positions, I'd take a flyer on both of them and stash them and see maybe maybe they go somewhere that'll develop them. One of you guys mentioned the Vikings pre-show. If the Vikings could get their hands on Richardson or Hurst, that could be a sexy place for either one of them as a D tackle. But we'll see. Now, the interesting thing for the Steelers situation is I would easily see them drafting linebacker. I know they took Devin Bush early in the first round, but they have a need still linebacker, even with Vince Williams. If Pittsburgh doesn't take a linebacker, Vince Williams should definitely be rosterable, because there'll be at some point during the season that he sees some fantasy relevance, or I should say not rosterable, but somebody you keep as kind of a priority free agent. If you've got MFL, keep him on a watch list per se. If you're in a deeper league and need linebacker help, because who knows if Devin Bush will bounce back from injury quickly? If they don't draft anybody, these are all what ifs. So there's a lot of guessing here. But that's kind of my initial off the cuff rip thoughts on these guys. Is all of them could have fantasy potential in deeper leagues. In your more, start one at each position type leagues where it's a lot of flexing, not touching them. I like the young guys' potential long term. If they can get somewhere, they're going to develop them. We'll see what happens. Kraig, any other thoughts on all that?
No, I mean, you sort of led into it, and it's going to lead into our discussion for the topic tonight. But, know your league. If you're talking about somewhere where you're going to start a defensive tackle or that interior line position, Sheldon Richardson was a top 6 guy last year, which, of course, in that kind of league is going to be incredibly valuable. He's going to be someone that you more want as a contender. But if you got him as, a free agent and you're rebuilding or something, those type of leagues you can probably get something for him. It's not going to be anything amazing, but something to help you with your rebuild. It's the same sort of thing with Vince Williams. Yeah, there was a lot of injuries for Pittsburgh last year. Just on that straight linebacker position, he was around linebacker 30, which is certainly startable in a lot of leagues. Now, that is separating out the edge position, which I know a lot of leagues don't do. But even if you throw those guys in there, like Paul said, he probably ends up sort of in that linebacker 3-4 range, which you're going to need those depth guys, especially if you see the same sort of things as last year with guys getting hurt a lot. We just don't know what this next year is going to be like. So having depth is still going to be key if you're trying to contend. Mm-hmm. He started off the year amazing with a whole bunch of double-digit games and faded as the season went on. I think he even got hurt. But those first few games, you were really happy on your investment, and sometimes that's all you need out of a guy like that.
Absolutely. All right, so tonight we're talking IDP roster construction. So I want to kind of set the scene in two very specific ways. So for those that are starting kind of a brand new league and you're about to draft, let's talk that conversation and then have a very different conversation. And okay, your league's established and you're, either a rebuilder or a contender, and it's kind of got a couple pronged approach there. So as we talk about roster construction, I want to kind of break the show up into two specific situations. Starting off fresh, years in, kind of where do you go from here? So as we have that conversation, we're going to start with the you're starting off brand new and starting a brand new league, and we'll start the conversation there. So Paul, when you are getting into a draft, I know last year we've done some drafting shows where we've gone many rounds deep, and when we start drafting IDP, and you can go back and watch those. Roto Heat, we've got lots of stuff here for you to watch. Paul, what is it your mindset when you're building a roster? Where does IDP start to come into the equation for you, and what are you looking to do with your IDPs when you're in a startup situation?
I'll get the easy one out of the way first. If we're doing an IDP only draft, say like we're expanding into it or something like that, if we're doing IDP only, I want to get one of the 4 or 5 really solid defensive ends, and I'll worry about the rest later. It's just easier to go ahead and figure out. Also, if I'm a rebuilder and that sort of situation happens where it's IDP only, I'm probably going to go for one of like Jamal Adams, maybe in the first round, maybe like Chin in the second round, because it's harder. It's easy to safeties, and if you end up with one, especially for a rebuild roster, you can go, okay, the pegs in the ground here and here, I'll worry about the other ones. If we're doing a combo situation, for example, and I know that I'm going to rebuild the roster, I'm going to let about the first 30 IDPs hit before I even consider one. And it's not that they don't have value, but just the turnover at the position of defense is high. I'm going to use the extra value on offense. If I'm someone who contends, maybe, I will consider breaking it so I can get one of White or Leonard. Also with one of the older defensive ends as my second rounder, and by end I mean edge if you're in flea flicker. But those are the basic strategies. Obviously, we can sit here and say, okay, if you draft your first, second, third defensive players here, you're going to want the other ones here later on. But that's more of a who falls in a scenario versus theory discussion. So what did you guys think about that?
Well, and you also have to know your league setup. If it's a real light league where you're only starting, one D tackle DN combo, 2 linebackers, 2 secondary player. That changes the dynamic of your draft for sure. So I don't hate that idea. I think you need to, if you're going into a startup, you have to know what you're going to do from the rip. Like, don't go in going, well, I think I'm going to try to compete and then flip flop during the draft. I think you just kind of have to pick the direction and go. In my mind, I want to load up on offense in a startup just so that I'm set there, because I know I would venture to say in every IDP league I'm in, it's kind of a 50-50 shot if the owners have a clue what they're doing. Like, you've got half the league that are pretty good, and then the other half of the league are maybe it's not that big a deal. So I try to understand my league, but I would load up offense and then start, kind of round, probably even later, probably even closer to double-digit rounds later, start thinking about IDPs, because I know I can find guys off the waiver wire. But Kraig, what's your thoughts on a startup? How are you addressing it?
The way it's gone lately for me is I tend to let the top tier guys go and just kind of pick up the second level guys or younger guys that I like that really haven't hit that I feel more comfortable about. I sort of like in the startup taking more of a gamble on those type of guys than just going for the surefire things, and kind of like you said with the offense, loading up more there. But it's really, and it's kind of the antithesis of what you guys said, but I think you really got to be flexible. You should go into a draft with a plan and not just winging it completely. But if everyone starts doing the exact same thing that you had planned on doing, and you just stick to that in the draft, you're going to lose out on value, and your plan probably isn't going to be working as well as you'd want it to. Now, some people are fine with that, all right, fine, I'll sit near the bottom or the middle most likely for a few years, and then hopefully if I'm confident in myself and my picks, it's going to go well. But at the same time, like I said, you're losing out on value, whether that's guys that maybe are a little bit older than you intended that are still going to fit into your plan, people that you could draft that are a good value where you're getting them, and then able to trade them to someone who is contending, possibly not thinking about it. So I think you do need to be flexible. I've changed my plans during drafts, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that's any draft in general. You're not always going to run into a situation where your plan goes the way that you wanted it to. So I kind of look at it that way. And, with the defense, like I said, I found in most of the leagues that I'm in, and I'm not in super deep, IDP, figurehead type leagues or anything like that where I know everyone is on their game. You do have to adapt for that. But for the most part, I've been pretty adept at finding guys off the waiver wire that I either want to keep or then flip if they explode and I don't have faith in the long term. I mean, I did that last offseason with Max Crosby, who, again, a guy that I like, but the value that I got in a trade was higher than I thought where he was going to be long term. So I flipped him off for getting him off the waiver wires year before.
What were you going to say, Paulie?
Also, if you are drafting and you say, hey, I'm going to go for all the young guys, but you see Bobby Wagner out there and you've seen 40 to 45 defensive players selected in front of him, I don't think it would happen because of the name, but he's getting older, so maybe you do see it. Don't be afraid and say, hey, I take Wagner and flip him in 3 weeks or 4 weeks of game action. Obviously, you risk he might get hurt, but that's every player. I mean, if you walk in with, and if you're not spending too much on the player, you can flip them. I don't want to say you invest in the player because that's where the big money heads. But if you're flipping them, you can spend a little bit of money on the flip market. And Wagner would be a player I would do it for. I'm sure we can name off, 20 others, but the guys who are older at their position who you're reasonably sure what you're getting out of them.
Yeah, and if you stumble across this video at some point, thank you for stumbling across it. But if you're listening to us and you're going, okay, that's great information, but when the rubber meets the road, how do I know where to take these guys? RotoHeat.com. We have IDP rankings. We can help you understand the value of the IDP players. Discord, Facebook, we've got an IDP chat set up. I mean, we can have these conversations with you. In this episode, we are trying to give you kind of the theories, some ideas to shoot for. If you're needing some more physical information on specific players, those would be the places to go. Here, we're going to help you kind of with the big idea when you're planning or in your draft. This is kind of what we would do in your situation. Let us be that silent co-owner with you that doesn't pay half your league fees, but we'll just tell you our opinions because we like to tell you our opinions. So that's great information on a startup. If you watched our video last year, I believe it was round 6 to 7 when we started seeing kind of the top end young talent go, like Darius Leonard, Jamal Williams, Jamal Adams. Jamal Williams is not going that high. Let that be stricken from
top end
stricken
right
from the record. Albeit, I am coming to find him.
Top end talent.
He's a Lions fan. Give him some slack.
He's quickly becoming one of my favorite Lions. That dude is entertaining as all get out, man. That dude's got personality. I love it. But definitely not a 6th round pick. So you start seeing some of those younger guys go, but I have no problems jumping on the thought that if you can get a real high-end, older IDP asset and you're going to flip them, I think that's a cool idea because you can really get some interesting trades going when you factor in some of these big-name IDP guys. So I like that idea. Don't be afraid to do that. I would also throw in the fact that you have to be mindful of your league scoring because there were early on when I started doing IDP, I didn't necessarily think about the league scoring. I had guys I wanted to target and I targeted them. And I'm not saying it was a bad idea. I'm just saying that you can really plan your draft strategy around knowing where the value lies. So if the top end linebackers are really only, if they, depending on your scoring, only producing at like wide receiver 2 or low wide receiver 2 type numbers, you value that differently when you're in a draft. So just be aware of those types of things. Again, it sounds like we're putting a lot on your plate to prepare for your draft, but it's not really. It's not that hard. Just things to be cognizant of. So now we've hit a startup. Knowing how deep your league is, the scoring, all that, we've now helped you, given you some general ideas on what to do. Now let's look at the flip side of things. So you've been in a league for X amount of years, and this is it could be a multiple faceted conversation as well. I know Paul mentioned a little bit about if you're doing a rookie only draft, so that would kind of factor into this conversation. If you're in an offensive league that adds IDP, you would do an IDP only draft. So some of the things Paul said would factor into this statement and into this part of the conversation. I'm really more thinking the fact that you've got an IDP roster, you've got a team, and you're either a contender or not. How do you handle roster construction? And in some cases, this is going to be roster deconstruction because you're a contender or you're not a contender, but maybe your IDP is strong, but your offense sucks, or things like that. Like there's a lot of pieces to this part of the conversation because you could be one of those teams in the middle where your team's not good enough to really be much more than a playoff contender. How do you get over the hump? Do you make a bold move for an IDP guy? Do you sell IDPs and just try to rebuild? There's a lot of parts that go into that. We started with Paul on the first one. Kraig, we're going to start with you. You've already got a roster. How do you know when to do something with it? And what are you doing with it if you're a contender? Do you keep trying to buy when you're a playoff contender or when you're a team that you're not going to win? What do you do with your rosters and how do you construct them then?
So you need to be realistic about what your team is and where you're at. And generally speaking, in most fantasy leagues, your offense is still going to carry you most of the way compared to your IDPs. Now, you can build it the other way, but, most leagues that we see, you don't have as many defensive spots as offense. You don't have as high scoring, generally speaking. So you still want to be favoring that offensive side of it. But if you feel they're there with their scoring, you want to be finding those guys either, every year those guys that are cut or out there on the waivers that shouldn't be, whether they're a free agent or their future's uncertain, picking those guys up if you can get them cheap. Just putting out feelers there on guys that are getting a bit older and looking at your teammates' teams. Brad, in the league we're in last year, I think I got Shaq Barrett and Carlos Dunlap off of you as I was contending. You're rebuilding there. They didn't really have a whole lot of use on the team you inherited. And so I traded you some Devies, and we moved parts around that way. So those sort of situations, just knowing what's going on in your league and what's available can help you. Now, you don't want to be trading for a guy that's likely to retire the next year that isn't playing a whole lot or anything. So looking up player stats, playing time charts are all over the internet to see how much they're getting, with their current team and what they might be capable of. And then a guy like even Clowney, who he's going to be in a position, like I said towards the start of the show, to try to have a really big year. He's in a good situation to do it across from Myles Garrett to try to get another big contract. Those motivations of players, where if you have him on your team and you're not contending and he's balling out, maybe you look at trading him, because historically he just hasn't been that guy at the NFL level where maybe if you can get him cheap for a year, you go out and get him. I tend to look at with these leagues, and again, it's more, I guess it's a deeper topic than a lot of these, but if there is a positional advantage that you can get on something like interior line or defensive tackle, sometimes those are worth paying up a little bit more if he's not overly old. Like even Aaron Donald, I mean, that guy's going to be a premium in pretty much any league. But if you're just getting around to contending now and you have a weakness there and you can afford to trade for a guy like that, I feel he's going to maintain that for at least, a good 3-4 years, and he's worth trading to go out and get a guy like that. Or someone else like, Sheldon Richardson, he did really well last year. You wouldn't be paying close to the same thing for him because just over his career, he hasn't shown that same sort of level, even though he did well. He's more of a guy I'd want to take a flyer on and not try so hard to go get. So, like you said, knowing your teammates on top of the scoring, league setup, and just your own roster is a big deal. But I've had more luck over my own time doing IDP finding guys on waiver wires or later in drafts. And I think spending the majority of your capital on offense to carry you most of the way is the better way to do it for most of these leagues anyway.
Mr. Feldboom.
Yeah, I'm behind that 100%. I think you have to know who you are. If your offense says that you're a top 3 or 4 selection, then you take as few of the elite assets as you can get your hands on. Maybe you're in a flipping situation and you go, all right, well, I just want Jamal Adams because he should be solid in a couple years, and he's at a position that's hard to find. And then your second best defensive asset is a rookie. That's fine. Maybe you don't have the pieces for anything beyond that. If you're someone who's in the middle, you have to somewhat make your mind up and make that decision. I wouldn't let the defense sway you. If you decide that you're blowing it up, then treat it that way. If you decide that you're going to head for it, don't let the defense stop you. There's enough of the players who show up for free. Vince Williams is being one of them. He can be fine, and he can be free. If you're someone who's in the playoffs, then maybe you keep the bottom, depending on league size, 3, 4, 5 defensive assets for rookie hopefuls, and the rest of them are older players who have a solid floor weekly. You just kind of have to structure it like the offense, and obviously it's what are you inheriting in this situation, but just figure out what assets you have. If you don't want to have any defensive assets per se, and you're going to pick first, second, or third, yeah, that's fine. The position turns over, but if someone says, hey, I really like my second, but I'll give you, I know he plays offense, but he got hurt week 3 or something last year. Hey, I got, Saquon, let's say Devin White, Leonard, I'll knock some wood here. They get hurt. All right, I want to hold my second, but this guy has a, ACL injury. All right, that's your trade target. Or you move a lower value player, but who is healthy, for the injured elite player, and just hope it works out in the future. But that's if they're holding their first, second, whatever league format, who's got what, and that's a trade specific issue. But
yeah,
yeah,
I never get too married to a player that for the right price I wouldn't move him, whether I'm a contender or not. Especially on the IDP side, because like Kraig mentioned earlier, you can find more than capable spot starters, replacements for half a season on the waiver wire. I've done it plenty of times. It's something that and I know that you guys have mentioned it in the past. I know we've talked about it on plenty of Roto Heat shows. You have to think about the long term. 2 to 3 to 4 year type window. Is this guy really somebody that you have to have for the next 3 to 4 years? The younger guys, probably. The Devin Whites. I would even throw in, Jeremy Chin, Duggar. Some of these guys we saw drafted last year, I think, are really good holds for long-term value. Especially Ashton Davis over in the Jets now that Robert Saleh's over there. I mean, you know, okay, I get that conversation. You don't want to trade him. The trade offers you've been getting are kind of rinky dink. You're not in any hurry. Don't be, in my mind, it's like, okay, don't be afraid to move a guy if the right deal's there. But also don't be afraid to say, I'm not worried about it. I'm going to hold him and see if you're not getting value that's worthy of the player. If in 2, 3, 4 years you can see any of these second year guys being, back end safety ones or mid end safety ones, or middle of the road, not mid end, middle of the road, then don't trade them. Hold them, see what happens, because they'll be more valuable. It's kind of like us. All of us have been doing some sort of collecting, whether it's cards, NFTs, all that stuff. It's a long-term play, no matter what you're doing. Whether it's cards, NFTs, all of it. It's not for the short term. Fantasy football is the same way. Think of it in a long-term game. So, us that I've.
It's actually funny. It's actually funny you mentioned that. I've had the Jalen Ramsey 101.
Oh,
Literally.
that's funny. There you go. Good stuff right there.
But to your point, Brad, I mean, just going back and look at the longest running currently league that I've had with Paul. So we have each year, it's a rookie free agent combined draft, 14 teams. There's 8 rounds. A lot of people don't use other picks. Yeah, I know that's bigger than your normal draft. But, there's guys like I've gotten off of waivers, and I know Paul has too, but just going through some of these, Shaq Thompson has gotten picked up late in drafts. Vince Williams was like in the 4th. Rashaan Evans went in the 4th. Jordan Poyer I got off of waivers before he exploded. Chuck Clark was another guy. Max Crosby wasn't drafted. So, I mean, if you go digging and you're paying attention, if you're in just sort of your average league where not a lot of guys are doing that sort of digging, I'm not saying you're smarter than your league, but are you going to put in the effort to go find those hidden gems that you can either flip, like I've done with several of those guys, or is it someone that if they're not panning out, you can ditch them and try to go find another guy? I think you alluded to it, Brad, but in most IDP leagues where it's just sort of a base level understanding and getting into it, there's going to be a lot of player flipping, and that's okay. That doesn't mean if you have IR spots and Devin White is out for the year or TJ Watt that you're just going to cut them. Save those guys. They're your top end guys. Put those backups and sort of that second linebacker, your starter, whatever in a 12-team league. You can probably rotate someone and be all right most of the time. It's just how much effort and time do you want to go into finding those guys where there is less information, just generally speaking, about IDP out there than literally everyone on the internet right now has an opinion that they're screaming from the mountaintops about Jamar Chase versus Devonta Smith. You're not finding that same conversation about Micah Parsons versus Zaven Collins versus Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. I mean, you have to dig to find those, and are you going to put in the time to do that will end up mattering. And even deeper than that, some of those other guys, that 4th, 5th round linebacker. Last year we had a lot of talk after the draft. Was it Jacob Wilson, and who was the other guy that went to the Browns? Logan Phillips?
Jacob
Phillips and Logan Wilson.
I might have had the names backwards. But either way, we ended up having that conversation where you got to go digging for that stuff. That's not going to be blasted all over your Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. So, but that's the sort of homework that can end up helping you in those leagues. Those guys, not in particular, but the linebacker was Nathan Gary for the Eagles. He ended up mattering last year. We talked about him, but there was also 3 or 4 guys you got to kind of stake your flag on in a situation like that. So it's knowing your league, but also knowing yourself and how much effort are you going to put into this? If you don't want to go digging for gold, maybe you spend more draft capital or trade capital just getting a top-tier target to set it and forget it so you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I was just for the fun of it, I went to, on MFL, I have couple of my IDPs are on MFL, and their reporting will show you how many transactions. So I looked for the last year, the amount of transactions, and I was just looking through it, and I mean, there's hundreds of IDP ad drops. I mean, and this isn't super deep. So this league, you're starting one DND tackle combo, two flexes, like a linebacker safety, I think. I mean, it's not very deep. And there's hundreds of transactions adding, dropping guys, IDP wise. I mean, don't be afraid that your draft or your your roster's never really finished. Obviously, we know that from the offensive side of things, but the same goes very much true with IDP. Is you can add and drop plenty of quality playable assets throughout the year and still find replacements later on if need be.
Yeah, especially if the league is that shallow. This is more of a you have to play 6 to 8 plus defensive assets a week, and you're probably going to roster 15 to 20 overall.
That's deep. Yep.
Discussion. I mean, if you're talking about, hey, we play 4 or 5 and we keep 3 to 5 on the bench, the Devi or the youth aspect of it won't matter for half the league.
Right.
Because they could pick up the depth, the playable depth on the wire.
Well, and even in trades, if you think about it, your average sort of league, most people care more about offense than IDP. It's just the nature of the industry right now. But you can take advantage of that too if you're in a league full of people that weren't crazy about changing to IDP or, don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. You might be able to get some of those defensive guys thrown in a trade or cheaper via trade than you would otherwise. You might be able to take a second-round wide receiver last year that someone's high on still, Jalen Reagor. I don't think he generally went in the second, but, someone whose value has decreased over the past year. You might be able to trade him for someone who still believes in him and that opportunity coming up for a defensive player that they're just not as knowledgeable about or as intent on keeping. So knowing those people and how they view that sort of stuff, and it's just that value proposition of what can you get for it. But I found for the most part in most of my leagues, people value defensive guys, and it's not just because of the scoring, but you can go out and find a lot of closer to the top end talent cheaper on the defensive side than the offensive side if you're going to put the effort in to find it. That's where talking to your league makes just having discussions, whether it's in a league chat or in person, seeing how they value guys. I know I'm not going to be able to get Jeremy Chin cheap off of anyone that pays attention to IDP, but there's other leagues where I know there's still some people out there that are like, who? So, put in the work, put in the effort to know your stuff, and then see what you can get out there. And usually good things are going to come your way. But, it's hard because offense is sexy in fantasy football. That's the part that everyone loves and has the debates about. The IDP is sort of more like the nitty-gritty behind it, and it's not for everyone, clearly.
It feels like you have less arguments on the defensive side also because there is it's a lot easier to say, hey, this group is all 10s, this group is all 9s, this group is all 8s. And on the offensive side, you can have a whole lot more arguments versus the defensive guys they basically have it as, all right, you want this guy, I'll take this guy right behind him and be just fine with it. You do have some out there who get all hard about it. Okay, that's fine. But you can find so many free assets in this that you don't have on the offense. I mean, you have one James Robinson on the offensive side, and suddenly everyone thinks this, that, the other thing. You have all 360 degrees of an opinion. On the defensive side, it's we know this is probably heading to Freeland again, and they just appreciate the free donut that they had versus seeing what they can flip it for and yada yada yada. You just don't have the spite.
Well, and I try to encourage people. I've always been when I got into fantasy football, I loved it. And as I tried to, as time went on, I tried to find ways to make it different, make it more unique. I loved when we went to the whole idea of taxi squads and adding in IDP and Devi and some of these other, Superflex and some of these other, other ways just makes fantasy more challenging, makes it more interesting. If you can set your scoring up, IDP can be just as valuable to a league as offensive can, and in some cases more when it comes to some of the top end talent in IDP. And that's what I like about fantasy football is that there's so many ways to make it unique. For everybody on Twitter, Fishbowl invites have been going out, so that is another way to make it more interesting. The way he does his leagues is challenging and fun, and it's different every year. That's what fantasy football should be. It should be fun. It should be challenging. I know there's a lot of money to be made for people, and there is very much an aspect of this that you can pick the right players and build those rosters and make that money. But in the end, we're still just playing a game. You have to enjoy it. And I really think people should open up and try IDP. I know it can be a steep learning curve for people that don't think they care, but when you're watching football on Sunday, defense is always on the field. So it's not like you're missing something. You're just not paying attention to it. So it's not hard to quickly learn IDP because defense is always on the field while you're watching those wide receivers make big plays. So just pay attention to who the guy is they just burned and didn't tackle him. Make sure you don't get that guy because he can't tackle and he gets burnt. That's kind of the ebb and flow of it. Enjoy it. This is just another way to make fantasy football exciting and different. And I'm all for that. I want to be different, want to have fun with it, and I want to make it more enjoyable. So that's my soapbox about IDP.
I find it interesting how addicted we all are to gambling on sports. This is basically a side bet and a prop one. Okay, well, this receiver is going to make the play. All right, well, I bet the safety makes the tackle, not the linebacker. It's just basically a prop. That's all. That's all it is. But you do have different levels of skill behind it.
Right. Very true.
I'm surprised it hasn't caught on more.
Give it time. Everything at some point gets there. What do you got, Kraig?
But kind of to your point, Brett, we're on here harping IDP and, talking to Austin over in the chat here on YouTube. It's this isn't for everyone. And even people that get dragged along into a league that decides to adopt it or something once it's already existed, you're not going to win everyone over. You just can't, whether it's, even having taxi squads, getting rid of team defenses, I think personally is an upgrade over not even having IDP, but you're going to find the whole gamut of options out there, which is great, but it also makes it challenging where you're going to have to go and find, whether it's Roto Heat, random people on Twitter, you can find just random leagues in Yahoo to join. Go out there and find what you enjoy, the type of league that you want to be in. There's beginner leagues. There's leagues where you can, dip your toes into it. Don't go to a campus to Canton league when you've never done Devi before or something like that. Get yourself antiquated with it. Know what you want. And if you really just want to dive into everything, go ahead. But it's going to be a harder learning curve, and you're going to have to put more effort into it to succeed. So just being real with yourself and just the expectations that you're putting on everyone else is going to matter. And it's that same sort of thing with these leagues. You're going to have people that don't want to trade with you, guys that don't want to trade defensive, people that are going to overvalue their defense. All this is so league specific that we run into, but I feel it's even more that way on defense because, there's a big debate over should there be a standard IDP scoring or something. There really aren't standard leagues anymore either. Superflex is getting a huge following. tiered receptions has a huge following. I mean, everyone is so scattered to the wind. Just find what makes you happy and go with that for a league.
Yeah, it's important to make it your own and your league. You know, you have probably 12 to 96 unique owners in your league, depending on how big your leagues are. You know, have fun with it, make it enjoyable, make it your own. Obviously, that has nothing to do with IDP roster construction, but we've talked about startups. We've talked about after you've already had a league going. This is our kind of soapbox to close the show. I would encourage you guys, you know, I posted in the chat, in the YouTube chat. Actually, I think it went to both Facebook and YouTube. I posted links to Discord. I also posted links to the site I go to for snap counts if you need to know your IDP snap counts. You know, jump in, ask questions. We're here to help. You know, Austin and Kraig have had a great conversation going this week and here on YouTube. You know, we're not opposed to answering any question you guys have. You know, hit us up on Twitter, hit us up in the Facebook community and Discord. We got an IDP specific chat on Discord, so it's not like you have to deal. You know, you can go straight in there and say, "This is my question," and we'll know what you're asking. So, Paul, any final thoughts before we close the show? Anything else you want to throw into the conversation?
It's been really fun the past week here. Just, you know, you crossed on it for a sec, but it's been really fun the last week just getting defensive assets for cards because no one wants them and they're cheap. I find it really fun. So basically, no, I don't really have anything to add here.
My Quentin Jammer autographed card agrees with you. Kraig, any final words, my friend?
Not on this, no. I mean, next week we're going to be going over the NFL draft before it happens, a few days beforehand. They're coming up in 10 days now. It'll already be going on. So that's going to be a big night for all of us in the fantasy football community, but Roto Heat, so make sure you have us on your calendar, at least check us out that night, and then we'll be doing a recap of the whole draft sort of in terms of defensive players the night after. So you get us for the draft the next 2 weeks. Discord, Facebook, like Brad says, find us anywhere. Twitter, don't find Paul on Twitter because if you do, it's not Paul. But no, if we can find you now, you're just hiding from us.
I have one, so I can look up certain
in the
things
shadows.
to follow. To follow Schefter. I've never made a post. The answer's still no.
Now we got to go looking for it.
You can slide in Paul's DMs.
And also, if you have interest, we do have a mock draft contest. If you're interested in joining, you can gain access to rookiedraftguide.com for the future. So that's a great tool for anyone to be able to have access to. So go check that out and join the fun.
And if you lose to Kraig's 4-year-old drawing out of a hat,
it was both my kids.
This happened to me
it was
once.
The combo of the two oldest picking names
shameful.
up. Yep, and Paul lost to them.
It's very shameful.
But it makes for a good
And
start.
I will say, spoiler to anybody who's actually watching this video, we've got some special stuff we're doing for the NFL draft this year. After each night of the NFL draft, we are going to go live and mock draft. Night 1, we're going to mock draft. Night 2, we're going to mock draft. Night 3, we're going to do a big, crazy mock draft. We've got a lot of content planned for during the draft. We are not necessarily going to be doing live streams because you have a lot of attention to be giving away, and we are not going to do that. We're going to be focusing in other areas. So keep it locked in. Subscribe, like, notification icon, do all the things that I tell you to do every time you see my face on your screen. Because we have a lot of great stuff. We're here to help you guys. Make sure you stick with us. Every Monday night, we talk IDP. I know we were talking IDP rookies for a while, so if you need to know what we think, the last probably month and a half, 2 months of videos, we were talking rookie IDPs. Coming up, we will be doing a little bit more rookie content. We also are going to be doing kind of IDP strategies for 2021, which was one of the bigger videos last year for us from live streams. Tomorrow night, we've got a special guest with Sully and I. We're going to be talking to Steffi Smalls. Everybody knows and is a big fan of her, and I'll be excited to have her on and do a super flex mock. Yeah, super flex mock is tomorrow night. No IDP though on that one, so if you IDP guys, I apologize. Just regular offense. Then on Thursday night, Paulie and I are going to be back talking freshman running backs. So I know that is a tantalizing prospect to talk freshman running backs before they're even remotely close to NFL ready. But that'll be a good one as well. So we thank you guys as always for hanging out with us. We appreciate everything you guys do. Don't forget to stay safe out there, and we will talk to you again tomorrow.